Well, the last session definitely was the most memorable for me because the person that run the convention had always wanting to finish on time and all that kind of stuff. And I said, "How much time do I have?" And she looked at me and said, "As much time as you want."
Hello and welcome to the Farm Traveler Podcast, the podcast for anybody curious to learn about where their food comes from. The National FFA organization is the country's largest student-led organization and is dedicated to making a positive difference in the lives of students by developing their potential for premier leadership, personal growth, and career success through agricultural education. Membership in the FFA is open to any student enrolled in any agricultural education program that can be found in states from Alaska to Puerto Rico and from the states of Maine to Hawaii. I might be a little biased here, but the FFA is a wonderful organization that provides its students with numerous education and leadership development experiences while also showing them all the agriculture industry has to offer. Maybe you were an FFA member in middle or high school, or maybe you never joined, but you've seen a few kids rocking that blue corduroy FFA jacket. That blue jacket represents a great deal, from the farm kids that started the organization in 1928 to the ever-ongoing struggle to show the world that agriculture is much more than sows, cows, and plows, and to the over 700,000 students that proudly wear that jacket today. One of those former members went on to accomplish a great deal in the organization and was one of the highest positions that the FFA has to offer. Former National FFA Advisor Dr. Larry Case was appointed by the United States Department of Education in 1984 as the Education Specialist for Agriculture, Agribusiness, and Natural Resource Education. One of his many responsibilities included his time spent as the National FFA Advisor. During his tenure, FFA membership grew a tremendous amount, the organization's name changed, and numerous educational innovations were made for agricultural education. In our interview today, Dr. Case will discuss his upbringing in Missouri, how he transitioned from teaching high school agriculture education programs to working with the Missouri Department of Education and the Missouri FFA. Dr. Case will also highlight experiences and job duties during his tenure as the National FFA Advisor and what he's been up to since he retired from the position in 2010. This is Farm Traveler Podcast, episode 49, with Dr. Larry Case. Well, Dr. Larry Case, welcome to the Farm Traveler Podcast. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. Being retired for almost 10 years now. Health is still good, so I feel pretty good about life.
I'm very excited to talk with you. You served for 26 years as the National FFA Advisor, and kind of before we dive into that, tell us a little bit about kind of where you grew up. I know you grew up in Missouri, but tell us about kind of your time growing up and kind of what you did all the way up until you got involved as the National FFA Advisor.
Okay, well, I'll try to be the shorthand version here, but basically I'm a Missouri farm kid. I grew up on a small general livestock and crop farm, small by today's standards at least. And Dad had hogs, cattle, sheep, and dairy, and he had a variety of crops of, wheat, oats, barley, corn, soybeans, and the hay crops. So I was appreciative of having a background in a variety of enterprises when I went to teach in ag. But anyway, I was in the local FFA chapter, went to a very small rural school in Missouri, 13 in my graduating class, only advanced to the state degree. It was called state farmer degree in those days. Knew probably that I wouldn't be a farmer, even though I wanted to be. I decided that my brother would probably be the one that would do the farming, and it turned out to be that way, my younger brother. And so I went through the University of Missouri at Columbia and started teaching in 1966. Did ag teaching for about 13 years, and I moved schools twice. I started at Northwestern High School in Minden, went to Oric High School in Oric, Missouri, and then Lexington High School in Lexington, Missouri. And I finished my master's degree by that time and advanced through a time of being a school administrator and building a area vocational technical school. So I had some experience with that. State Department of Education called, and I went to the State Department of Education as a district supervisor. And a year later, I was appointed as the State Director of Ag Education, State Advisor of the Missouri FFA Association. And I was there for 8 years. And while I was on the job, I completed my doctoral studies and was able to land a doctorate degree in 1983. My goal was to do that before I was 40, and I graduated two days before my 40th birthday. So that worked out well. Then some things happened in Washington, D.C. at the U.S. Department of Education. Byron Rawls was a predecessor of mine, and he retired early. Took an early retirement buyout, and then I was through a series of activities and events, was lucky to be appointed the Department of Education Senior Program Specialist in Agriculture, Ag Business, and Natural Resources Education. That's what it was called at the time. With that job come to be the chairman of the board and National FFA Advisor, and also president of the FFA Foundation. That would have been May the 24th, 1984. And then in the mid-'80s, if you remember, the agricultural enterprises across the country were suffering in a economic depression. In the 70s, we had a lot of good prices, and people borrowed lots of money and bought lots of extra land and really couldn't do much wrong. But in the 80s, the Fed hiked up the interest rates so high. I remember having 13%, 14%, even 16%. I've heard of some that had to pay interest on those loans, and the banks were calling the loans. And of course, with those kind of things are going on, and the commodity prices dropped, and so the farmers were caught with lots of debt, and a lot of them lost century farms and a few things like that. So with that come a drop in enrollments and FFA membership. And so when I started in 1984, the National FFA and Ag Education, basically across the country, was going out of business. And it was a pretty tough time. We were lucky enough to get a national study and put some things together there, and we were able to change a few things in FFA and open up the program with some broader curriculum. And long story short, when I retired in 2010, at the end of 2010, we had just broken the membership record for the National FFA organization, and since then it's been growing ever since. So I feel pretty good about our 26 years, and thought that we went through a lot of change and we survived and come out prosperous. And that's about as good a time you need to retire. Whenever I've had nearly 45 years experience in the profession. When I retired, I lacked 23 days of having 45 years. So I'm going to round it off and say I had 45 years of experience. So that gives you maybe a little too much of my career, but basically that was how I went from Missouri farm kid to the National FFA advisorship.
You know, that sounds like a fun ride. I mean, it definitely seems like you retired on top after the FFA had grown so much. So what were some of your biggest responsibilities when you were the national advisor? I know you said you were the foundation president, you were on the board of directors. So what were kind of some of your main responsibilities as the national advisor?
Well, of course, the national advisor is only integral to agricultural education. So I felt major responsibilities and challenges in shifting the curriculum to be broader and more inclusive. At that time, we had another entity that just started in 1983, the December, I think it was, or January of 1983. It's called the National Council for Agricultural Education. I started out as the chair of that group. And basically what we've done is is evolve the curriculum or the teaching material so that local teachers could broaden their program. Such things as food science, such things that are fine today, or should say, very common today in ag education, were not common back in 1984. It was primarily production agriculture oriented. And so to think about careers in horticulture and food science and environmental sciences and technology and those kinds of things, we really try to get people thinking about agriculture as a food, fiber, and natural resources system rather than just the farm production. Farm production is still core, of course, because without that, we don't have food on the table. But the biggest challenge I think I faced was moving the curriculum to a broader position. And then in 1988, we had 19 constitutional amendments, and those were very challenging. We changed the words agricultural education, vocational agriculture to agricultural education on the emblem. We changed the names of the degrees to FFA degrees, not state farmer. It's state FFA degree now, American FFA degree, etc. Broadened, tried to show that we were including people by doing business as a national FFA instead of Future Farmers of America, which was very controversial because the farmers felt like they were being abandoned one more time. However, that was not the case. So all these shifts, I believe 18 of the 19 amendments passed, and I've really forgotten what the one that didn't pass, but it was a very challenging time whenever we were doing all those changes and attempting to move a long traditional system into a modern era of what really is happening in the economic sector of food, fiber, and natural resources. That was probably the toughest battle. I should say it's not a battle, but many battles fought. And so most won, but some lost. So it's the way life is. So I hope that answers your question.
No, that does. That really does. And I think that shift that you were talking about to where it's keeping that agriculture root, but it's kind of showing and focusing that, or kind of telling kids that there's more in agriculture than just, cow, sows, and plows, which is what we all heard. There's natural resources, there's food science, there's chemistry, there's biology, there's all these different disciplines. And that's something that even I learned about 10 years ago whenever I was in FFA, is that it's a lot more than just farming. And I think that shift is something that's continued to kind of have a huge impact on the FFA to help it grow to where it is today. So that's really neat. Where are some really cool places that you traveled during your time? Did you ever go to Japan? Because I know that they have a very similar organization over there. I think it's called like FFJ. So did you ever go to Japan?
Yes, I did go one time and met several ag teachers, and Mr. Matsumoto, Mr. Shidani are two people that I remember from that trip. That was a wonderful trip. Was able to see the Japanese culture and so forth. I also was able to go on a tour to Europe, basically, which included meeting with young farmers in Germany, seeing the ports there. We landed at Frankfurt and went to. Then we trained to Paris to an ag show, went to Belgium during that trip to the EU and headquarters, and that was quite interesting. Probably the most, I don't know, they all are memorable, but I can tell you that having gone to Russia just before the a coup occurred, and I've forgotten what year that was, but Khrushchev was trying to get a little more capitalism going, if you would, entrepreneurship. And there was a group of farmers that banded together, and I've forgotten what they were called, but they banded together and was wanting to be sponsors for a few folks to come over to the U.S. and see modern agriculture in the U.S. But we were able to tour some state farms and visit lots of universities and colleges. And I think we had, I've forgotten, I think it's 20 or 30 visas, and every place that we met all said they had 30 people that were highly qualified. So we had a lot of people interested in coming. And the stories that I have there, I don't take too much of your time, but the story quick story I would tell you is when we exited, and it was dreary, cloudy. Everywhere we went in Russia, there were soldiers that were armed to the hilt, and they were everywhere. And I never felt like I was by myself, and I felt like I was being watched all the time while I was there. But when we left, there was a Jewish lady ahead of me, and they just literally harassed her to no end and dumped her suitcase out on the floor, and she had to pick everything up. Waved me on through, and got that was the first checkpoint. The second one was a little scan that they do on the luggage for whatever, contraband or whatever, and got through that one. Then the next step was to look at your passport, and the guy didn't smile a bit, looked at you, looked at the passport, looked at you, looked at the passport, and then yanked the visa out like it was like I'd never been there, and took that and kept that and waved me on. Went through another magnetometer and went through that and got into the waiting area, got ready to board, and there was a soldier at the door with the ticket agent checking every ticket. Walked outside into the cold air, down the steps, across about, I don't remember, 20 or 30 yards to the airplane, and there were three soldiers, one at the base of each steps and one in the middle, armed with Uzis and that type thing. Got on the plane, the soldiers come on the plane and looked at everybody again. They finally closed the door, we left. Got to Frankfurt, Germany, looked around, the sun was shining, and I said, "Where's the soldiers?" So it was a memorable experience in trying to leave, as well as the many things that happened while we were there, which were all good. And so that's, I also had the opportunity to go to Costa Rica on about a 10-day trip. So that's some of the things that we did. I think, as I remember, while I was National Advisor, I was able to visit 8 countries. So that was a pretty nice thing.
That's a pretty good track record. And yeah, that happened in Russia sounds pretty interesting. I bet that sounds like it was a very, very interesting time to go to Russia during that. That's very cool. Your last convention was in 2010. You were retiring, and I remember you were going through, the advisors, say, in the opening closing ceremony. And I remember you had about, I think we counted it like a 10 or 15-minute standing ovation. I think everybody was going nuts, and I remember that part. Everybody was cheering for you. Everybody was like, you know what? He's been a great advisor. He's been so great in helping kind of the FFA grow and kind of get ready for this new century. And so do you have any like lasting impressions that you have from that last convention? I mean, I know you've been to probably a lot since then, and you've been to, like, you were obviously a lot since before 2010. So do you have any like memorable moments of your last convention in 2010 as the national advisor?
Yeah, there were several. I'll try to just give you a highlight or two, but there was a lot of good things. I don't know just what year it was that we started doing an advisor's challenge or advisor send-off. It actually started my speaking on stage for about 5 to 8 minutes and it was started in Kansas City as an advisor send-off. But of the last convention, I recall that we shifted quite a bit, and I believe I kind of focused on saying a few things about what it meant to me to be a national advisor during this time, and for me that was kind of a memorable. I'd have to dig it out and look at the various phrases and so forth that I used, but I was allowed a little extra time, and I had people come to me and say that's the best one you ever did. So
Well, there you go. That's awesome.
Highly emotional for a lot of people. I was able to hold it together, and I'm pretty emotional myself when it comes to things like that. Then you mentioned the last session definitely was the most memorable for me, because the person that run the convention had always wanting to finish on time and all that kind of stuff. And I said, "How much time do I have?" And she looked at me and said, "As much time as you want."
There you go. That's awesome.
I went, "Oh my goodness." And so to have my whole family there with husbands and wives and grandchildren was very special. And my grandson that was there was Becky's and my her daughter, and she's an ag teacher, and the kids all spoke at that time and had several FFA members on video speak, and all that happening was very special. I recall specifically my little grandson at that time, who's now 15 years old and taller than I am, got up on stage, and I said, "Aaron, can you show him a little dance?" And he did a little he said no, and then he did a little wiggle where the delegates, make that convention, and the delegates just went wild. And then he really got into it. He did a little dance for him. And he doesn't remember that, but we have it recorded on a CD one of these days. I'm going to catch him when he's got his girlfriend there and show that to them.
I bet that'll be embarrassing. That'll be hilarious.
That was an interesting moment. But I tell you, you spoke about the ovation. That happened during the opening ceremonies. I think that may be the one you're talking about. They treated me so nice. It was all just really great for me. I mean, it just really was. But I had an interview immediately following, and they wanted to know how I was able to hold my composure during the time whenever they said, "Mr. Advisor," and I said, "Here by the owl." Everybody went nuts, and it was just on and on and on. And then finally I had to just start saying it. And you probably noticed it, but I tried to hide it the best I could. For the only time that I know of, I said, "Here by the owl." Then the owl is a time-honored emblem of knowledge and wisdom. And I could not remember the next phrase to beat so I didn't make any sign that I made a mistake. I just started again.
Well, there you go.
And I made it through. It's basically 3 sentences. And I made it through that second try. So the last hoorah, and I screwed up. That's the way I felt.
I doubt anybody noticed. I don't remember that at all. But, I mean, the fact that you just got through that, congratulations. I mean, that's so cool.
They asked me in an interview following it, "How did you hold your composure?" I said, "I had to focus on the business at hand."
Well, there you go. Yeah, just focus one last time.
and that was true. I really had to focus on the business at hand. Well, I did appreciate all the recognition. That's not any question.
Yeah, I mean that I think it was consecutive Fieldhouse where the Pacers play, and that place is going nuts for you. So we were talking a little bit earlier. It seems like you are enjoying retired life a little bit, a little less on your plate now. So what all have you been doing now since you've been retired?
Well, my wife and I have had the fortune to do some traveling. The grandkids are having a fight now. You picking that up?
Yeah, that's totally
Anyway,
fine.
matter of fact, I tell you, we started the retirement in my mind correctly, in that we were able to be the guest of RFD TV to go to the Rose Bowl, the Rose Parade. Again, I mean, they sponsored the FFA float the year before, I think, or so, and I forgot just when that happened. Which, by the way, is another highlight of my career, was riding the Rose float in the Rose Parade. That was very memorable. We had the good fortune of going on several trips. One of the trips that we went on was a railroad trip and a bus trip across the country. It was a America by Rail trip, and we started here in Fredericksburg and went to Flagstaff, Arizona on the train, and then went north to, I think it was 8 or 9 national parks that we saw. And that was ended up in Whitefish, Montana, and then trained back home. My wife always wanted that long train ride. Second trip I recall was that we went to Amsterdam and took a Viking tour, a river tour of the area around Amsterdam, around the Netherlands. They called it the Windmill and Tulip Tour. That was a real interesting tour. Okay, there was another one in there. What was it? The latest trip we had was last year that we went to Alaska on a land and cruise combination. We flew into Fairbanks and spent 5 or 6 days on the land and about 10 or 12 days on a cruise, and that was a very good trip. I'd been to Alaska on business, and my friend Helen Merkins up there was the state director of vocational education, and at the time they called it that. And she showed me. I was the state liaison to Alaska when I was in the Department of Education, and so she showed me Alaska vocational education, and it was a very fascinating trip at that time, as well as the one we just come off of. So we are enjoying traveling. We have a daughter that lives in Indianapolis and works for National FFA. And so we go to Indianapolis, and we haven't missed a convention yet. We go to the convention, so that's kind of fun to be able to do that. I told somebody on my first convention after retirement that I slept late and didn't feel guilty at all. And anyway, we've done that, and we have a son that lives in Missouri, and we go out there. And of course, we're both from Missouri and have interest in Missouri. We both own land in Missouri through inheritance, so we have reason to go out that direction. So then we keep up with church activities. I'm chairman of the deacons this year at the local church here, and that's taken some time. One other thing I would add is that for probably the biggie was I just was asked to join the alumni council, National FFA Alumni Council, and did so, and was able to get voted in on that. And so I spent 6 years doing FFA, National FFA alumni work, and ended up being president and president-elect, president, and past president. And that was a fun venture. And then here in Virginia, had both local alumni activities as well as state foundation activities and association activities that I participate in and served on their boards and so forth. So, yeah, I had that probably about 6-7 years of that. Was still working in FFA, and I found out that this sounded a whole lot like what I used to do, and I thought I'd retired from that, so I took another hitch at trying to retire. And I've been fairly successful at that, but I still participate. If they ask me to judge a contest or something like that, it'd be fine, and I'd be happy. I'm happy to do it. And I missed the last 2 state conventions. I probably will make it this year to the state convention. So, that's in general, that's what I've been up to, and just enjoying life. I'm fortunate enough to have our youngest son and family living with us, so I'm practicing an old agricultural tradition of having 3 generations under one roof. And the commotion you heard a while ago was got a boy that's 4 and a girl that's 7 now, and they were into something. I don't know what they were doing, but it's always popping around here when you got little kids in the house, and it keeps us young. I feel very fortunate in having a wonderful career and in an area of work of which there is truly a family atmosphere, and we can fight with each other, but I got to tell you, in the purpose for us being there, we're united in our purpose, and that's and we argue about the details sometimes and how we get there, but it's been just a wonderful career. God's blessed us tremendously with a good career and now with a good retirement. So I'm just thankful, and I thank the good Lord every day for this.
Amen. Amen. Well, Dr. Case, this has been so cool, kind of catching up with you again. As a former FFA member and state officer from down here in Florida, it was cool to catch up with you and see what you're doing. Thanks for helping the FFA grow and become what it is today. I wish you nothing but the best as you continue to enjoy your retirement. I hope you have fun with those grandkids and go on a couple more adventures along the way. So thanks for being on the show, man. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening to episode 49 with Dr. Case. If you want to learn more about the National FFA, check out ffa.org, and you can learn all that the organization has to offer. If you like this episode, consider sharing it with a friend or family member. Share it on Facebook, share it on Instagram, share. Thanks for listening. We'll see you in the next episode. Gotta figure out something else to say, like something catchy, like stay classy or something. We'll figure it out. Anyway, thanks for listening. See you next episode. Bye.
All right, do you want the good news or the bad news first? I know, always lead with the bad news. Okay, the bad news is the episode of this podcast that you love, it's over. Yeah, I'm sorry, it's over. Don't you hate that feeling when you finish the latest episode of your favorite podcast and then you don't know what to listen to? Well, I got a show that you should check out. It's called Homesteading, and it's hosted by me, Aust. I live on a homestead with my family, and we live off the land. We grow our own food in our gardens.
We're going cherry picking today. Grab your bucket, get in the car.
We raise livestock for meat and milk.
This week on Homesteady, the pigs are arriving.
We hunt, we fish.
I was almost done hunting. I was just sitting there thinking about climbing down. I looked, twig snapped, took a peek. Oh man, big buck. Got the camera ready.
Wow! Oh, bud! That's the biggest trout we ever got!
If you want to lead a life that's a little bit more self-sufficient, a little bit more sustainable, check out the Homesteady podcast. You'll hear our stories and hopefully be inspired to start some of your own. Homesteady releases a podcast every single week for you to enjoy an adventure in the outdoors. And this show is just one of the fantastic shows that make up the Waypoint Outdoor Collective, the podcast network for outdoorsmen. Click the link in the description below to go to Waypoint Outdoor Collective, download Homesteady, and check out some of the other fantastic podcasts while you're waiting for the latest episode of your favorite one that just finished.